I end my book with a great quote by another great woman visionary, Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, who said something I can't think of anything more important. She said, never think that a small group of committed citizens can't change the world. In fact, that's the only thing that ever has. So the conversation you and I are having right now and the feedback you get from your listeners and your viewers has the potential to self-organize itself into other podcasters who are doing things like what we're doing, radio shows like I'm doing. And if we do it right, synchronistically, we will start to connect with each other and collaborate and create this new Renaissance. But it always happens, and I point to the Italian Renaissance, through and after a period of darkness. With the Italian Renaissance, it was the Black Plague. In our time, it's going to be through the darkness and catastrophes of we're already seeing with global warming. And we're already seeing with the political, economic, and social disruptions taking across the world. Our task, Bernie, is to get underneath all that competition and anxiety and access our ability to cooperate, empathize, and connect with each other, because as you've stated in your books, nature itself is a totally interconnected web. It's not a collection of isolated objects, which is how we were taught nature works. And nature, we're separate from nature, and we're to take from her what we need for our own personal comforts. How's that working out?
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, MD. I've got a new book coming out in May called Life-Changing Synchronicities. It's about the way I've experienced synchronicities in my life. I'll tell you more about it as we go on. Today, we're going to have, whether we like it or not, a few laughs because Doug Grunther, our guest today, and I have a good time together. And part of the good time is a mutual interest, belief, heartfelt sense that we can find a way to integrate our human consciousness with artificial intelligence and Gaia, the consciousness of Earth. And this is the journey that I think we are all on to be able to manage, to learn to get to a cooperative place, a place where we help each other. And probably we're going to experience a big explosion of problems. And afterwards, we'll develop a web of interconnectedness that's mutual and beneficial to most of us. Doug Grunther is a guy that's been around, a little bit, as you will soon see. He's currently he's the creator and co-host of the Woodstock Roundtable, which he describes as a rollicking and multi-award winning radio show. You'll see the rollicking part of this as we get into this more. His talk show is spiced with humor and informed by his love of philosophy, depth psychology, and spiritual insight. His guests have been among the most original visionaries of our time, and he is one too, as you will see if you get around to reading his book. This book, The Quantum and the Dream, is really fun to read. He's got a lot of quotes from very interesting people. The intent of it is really to try to be able to put AI, nature, and humanity together. And we'll get into how he has some idea about how to do that. Doug graduated from Columbia University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar finalist. He's been a featured speaker in front of many national audiences and is a DreamWork facilitator certified by Jeremy Taylor. Welcome to the show, Doug. Welcome to the show.
It's great to meet you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, we're having it, and we've already had a little bit of it, and let's go on to it with, would you please tell us a coincidence story, Doug?
Well, um, as I get older, Bernie, I become less nostalgic because the present is so interesting, complex, and important, as is the future. But when I do reflect back, I often do it through the 20 or so synchronicities that have really guided my life. And the one that was most responsible for you and I talking right now happened back in 1978. I was trying to get into radio. I really wanted to become a talk show host, but getting in the New York City radio scene was difficult. And I kept poking around, and I was teaching tennis at the time because it was a love of mine. I'd gotten very good at it. It got me into college, and it was a way to generate income. But I was always on my mind seeking that doorway into radio. So one day I had an old upright piano. It was my grandmother's in my Greenwich Village studio apartment that I liked playing, and it needed a tuning. Now, to show how far back this is, Bernie, this was when there was no such thing as personal computers or the internet or Wikipedia or Google. We had phone books, and the Manhattan phone book directory, the yellow pages for businesses, was huge. It was like, 8 inches thick. And I looked up piano tuners, and there were dozens of piano tuners listed. Who am I going to pick? I literally closed my eyes and just dropped my finger on a name. And that person, I call him Tony the piano tuner, came to my studio apartment, was tuning my piano. And as we're talking, he mentions that friends of his are starting a radio station in Woodstock, New York. I said, wait a minute. Woodstock, New York doesn't have a radio station? One of the artistic centers of the world? He said, yeah, my friends, they live in Queens. They have a second home up in Woodstock. You ought to talk to them. I said, I want to talk to them now. He gives me their phone number. I was in my tennis clothes. They said, come on over. I drove over to Queens after paying Tony for tuning my piano. And an hour later, we had an agreement that I would be part of the team that started Radio Woodstock in 1980. And I became the first program director and gave myself a talk show. 44 and a half years later, I'm still doing it.
And you're still doing it. And the way you got here was this, I'll call it bibliomancy, that is using a book to predict the future. It's kind of like the I Ching does, or opening a holy book and seeing what page you come up with. You did it with the New York City phone book. But it's the same idea. There in randomness, there is order. And that's how mantic arts work, like tarot cards and the I Ching. Somehow out of chaos, there's order that comes out, and you did it. And what I didn't realize was that you had been wanting to be a radio talk show host. You had been wanting to do that. And in wanting to do that, when you think about this, and I have my thinking about it, but when you think about it, how did your desire to be a radio talk show host have anything to do with picking that Tony the piano tuner thing out?
Well, I certainly see this is tricky, Bernie, because as you know, if we try to rationalize and dictate exactly how this kind of process worked, we would be in the wrong side of the brain. One of the key discoveries that I made, thanks to the work of Dr. Ian McGilchrist, a contemporary visionary, is that I've always been a right hemisphere thinker, and understanding the distinction between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, I think would be an interesting way to go here, because our left hemisphere can only understand the world through order, rationality, and a clear sequence. The right hemisphere of our brain, which is larger geographically than the left and more intricately wired than the left, is the part of our brain that is open to curiosity. It's not trying to understand things rationally. It's open. It opens itself up to possibility. And since my intention to really want to be a talk show host had to do with the fact that I found life the business world too structured. And I wanted to do something. I wanted to create a career where my mind could be open to new possibilities, to talking with people who are imaginative and creative. And I've read some of your books, and you state that openness and curiosity seem to increase the chances of a synchronicity happening. And I would say that nature's intelligence, which is far superior than our human intelligence and far superior to even computer intelligence, AI, nature's intelligence seems to, I'm going to use the word, be attractive to openness and curiosity. And we can prove that empirically through some of the work I talk about in my book, the work of biologist Lynn Margulis, the work of cultural historian William Irwin Thompson, the great mythological work of Joseph Campbell, and the metaphysical connections of the psychologist Carl Jung. They're all about openness, curiosity, and just wanting to expand our understanding rather than try to restrict it so that it feels a little more secure.
Good. One of my fun phrases related to that is taking a chance on chance.
Great.
It's chancy, but there's a chance something might work out. I mean, you get to play with chance, and that's the whole idea. What you did was play with chance. You said, "Oh, look," and one way of thinking about it, and then how it happened is still a mystery, and that's part of the fun of this. I'm not trying to go to a rational explanation, but I'm going to a partial rational explanation, what you just did, which is that somehow you had an idea, and that idea could somehow find its way into manifesting through the use of randomness, which we don't quite understand, but you just tried to make a good description. The intuition is an important part, but we're guided by so many different things, and allowing ourselves to be guided, that openness and curiosity leads us to possibilities. And that's what I think you had.
Well, you brought up a word that I think is crucial and helps maybe define this a little bit more, and that's the verb to play. Nature loves to play. Sometimes it looks a little cruel and disruptive, but nature loves to play. And here's another synchronicity. When I did fairly well in grade school because I knew I didn't want to disappoint my parents and my grandparents, but I knew that what I was being taught was very limited, and quite frankly, most of it was boring. It's because I didn't know it then. I was a right hemisphere thinker even as a kid, and our educational system, as I go into in my book, is very left hemisphere oriented. But in fifth grade, bored with whatever the teacher was forcing us to memorize, she showed us a movie, a short movie about nature. And when two otters came on the screen, sliding down a mudslide that they had created, and the narrator was saying, "Otters love to play," I remember a tingling sensation in my body, and I went, "That's me. That's me. I'm one of those otters." Because to me, I love baseball, and I love baseball cards, and I loved games. I loved board games. Was much more interesting to me than what I was forced to memorize in school. And so I couldn't put it together back then, but now I realized I was very much in the right hemisphere of my brain. And we now know empirically that play, games and that play, if we look in nature, what's more engaging than watching two squirrels chasing each other on a branch, or two kittens playing each other with a bowl of yarn? Nature loves to play, and when we are in a playful place, and play can be very serious, but when we have that feeling of play, I think we're more open to synchronicity.
I very much agree with you. And just because Einstein gets quoted a lot, whether it's him actually who says it or not, but play is one of the best forms of research.
Well, in the first section of my book, which is about the shift from the left to the right hemisphere of the brain, which is not only important in terms of synchronicity, but if we're going to make it through the ravages of global warming and the potential difficulties with AI if we don't get it right, and the obvious economic, political, and social disruptions taking place around the world, we're going to have to shift to the right hemisphere of the brain. And that's where we tune more into nature's true intelligence. And Einstein is a perfect example, because even those left hemisphere rational scientists and philosophers who you and I bump heads with all the time, they can't say bad things about Einstein. You know, he's one of the greatest scientists of all time. And in my book, I point out, it's been authenticated. First of all, he stated, Bernie, quote, "My entire career is based on a dream I had when I was 11 years old." Okay, he said it. We have that dream. You know, I give my own interpretation to it, but he then, after graduating college, it's well known he was not a great student, because he was a very right hemisphere thinker in a left hemisphere institution. And his professors didn't think he'd amount to much, and he couldn't get his PhD. Okay, so he just loved to think, and he said, "I'll take a job in a patent office. I'll support my family, and it's easy enough work that I can spend most of my time sitting at my desk doing thought experiments." Talk about play. He loved to play with thought experiments. And his most famous one, he imagines, this is in the right hemisphere of the brain, we now know that through neurology, he imagined what it would be like if he chased a light beam, because the mystery of science in the first decade of the modern age, the 20th century, was, what is light made of? Why does it seem to be sometimes a particle and sometimes a wave? It was driving the left hemisphere thinkers crazy. But Einstein thought it was, hey, let me play with that. So he chases a light beam in his imagined visual thought experiment. And when he catches up to the light beam, time stops. That gave him an intuition, combined with his dream, that maybe light is the fastest thing on the planet. And he used that intuition as part of his ability to adopt the mathematical formula E = mc squared. So while relativity has been empirically verified and changed the very way we look at nature and our own individual subjectivity, it came to Einstein rather than to somebody else. That's not a coincidence, because he was playing in the right hemisphere of his brain, which I describe as the ultimate playground of visionary ideas.
Play. And in your book, you mentioned two other ways that people learn. One is stories, and one is by well, trial and error is a nice name for it, but the school of hard knocks is what I tend to, because one of the best places to learn from is failure. It's still trial and error. Oops, I shouldn't do that. So you come up with some other way of doing it. And so I think this is an important list that you have there, play and stories and trial and error about how we learn about things.
Well, and now let's apply that to the way our school system works, okay? First of all, in school, are we rewarded or penalized for errors. We're penalized, right? Get it right. Well, that's not the best way to learn. The best way to learn is through trial and error. Number two, games and play. How much of, if you notice our grade school education, in kindergarten, we played most of the time. In first grade, we played a little less. And the more you graduate towards the higher grades, the less playful the educational system comes. And the third one is stories. We're taught to improve our working memory so we can feed back what the educational system considers the right way of looking at things. A really successful educational system would encourage trial and error, not restrict it. It would add more games and play to the educational method. And three, it would teach us that stories and the imagination are one of the greatest ways we learn about reality. Now, that just sounded like an interesting contradiction, but it's true. The more imaginative we are, the more we get in sync with nature's intelligence, which is what I would describe as reality. Not what a board of education says, this is how we're going to look at history and not any other way. And just think about it. We're now living in the age of the World Wide Web. You and I are connected through the World Wide Web, along with your listeners and your viewers. Podcasts like this are happening all over the world. And given that, given the fact that we are literally keystrokes away, as is an 8-year-old, keystrokes away from humanity's greatest knowledge and wisdom through the World Wide Web, through the hypertext links and search engines, which are only getting more sophisticated. If we can't point ourselves towards a new renaissance in the age of the World Wide Web, when our ancestors in the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries did it, in the Italian Renaissance, under the threat of the Black Plague, which was on its way to killing a third of Europe, and they didn't know the cause of it, when less than 1% of citizens were even literate. They created the Great Italian Renaissance. If we can't do it in the age of the World Wide Web, that's on us, okay? It's our responsibility to make this happen. And I think we're going to do it.
And that the idea of personal responsibility is fundamental to what I'm doing, and want to keep getting people to hear that it's not God or the universe that is doing it. It's not a random universe that we live in. It's a universe where we have responsibility for what can happen. So let's say we got some responsibility. And one of the things that you're doing in your book, The Quantum and the Dream, both of which you're interested in. You're a dream guy, and you got heavily into the quantum ideas. What can we do? What can we do, Doug, as right now, not knowing what's going to happen, but what can we do to put together these three major elements that you are talking about in your book, and I'm most interested in, is nature's intelligence, to respect that, to know that we are ourselves part of nature. We're not separate from nature. That continues to be an important polarity that we have to bridge, that we are part of nature, that we have our minds, that we have artificial intelligence coming into our lives. So how do we integrate human intuition, right brain, left brain, love, our own, what we have in ourselves, with AI and the consciousness of nature into the future? Because that's the renaissance that you're talking about in your book, and we need to be able to find a way to do.
Well, if I had to answer your question specifically, and it's a brilliant question, which actually encompasses the entire range of my book, which is almost 300 pages. I would use this analogy. You and I and your listeners and your viewers probably have all, to some degree, practice some form of either meditation, contemplation, or quieting the mind, right? And I don't care whether it's a formal meditation or I do a more casual one. We all experience, not only us, but all of our ancestors. We know from writings of the great spiritual visionaries, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Kabbalists, the Gnostics, the Zens. We all experience something similar when we try to meditate or contemplate. And that is what's often referred to as the chattering monkey mind, right? The first thing that happens when we sit down quietly is we hear that part of our brain that's constantly chatting. How come you didn't get this done today? What about this? What about that? And in any form, whether it's self-hypnosis, which was my first entry into the right hemisphere, was learning self-hypnosis, whether it's creative visualization like Einstein did with his thought experiments, whether it's some form of formal meditation. The trick is, or the practice is, how do we get underneath the noisy, loud, chattering monkey mind, which all of us have, to the depth, the quiet, and the wisdom that resides underneath it in the meditative, contemplative mind, which we now know is the alpha and theta brainwave states, okay? So why do I bring this up? If when we sit down as individuals to contemplate or meditate, we have to get underneath the noise of all of our chattering mind, why should we expect to go on the World Wide Web, the digital screen, and expect it to be anything other than chaotic and noisy? And that's the 24/7 news cycle. And that's the load of advertisers who are coming at us to buy stuff we don't need. People who are trying to get us to believe things that are in their interest, not ours. So to get to your answer, we are all responsible to train, practice getting underneath the noise of the 24/7 news cycle. I'm not saying ignore it. We need to know what's going on in the world. But the information we're getting from the 24/7 news cycle is not the deep reality of what's going on. It's the surface. And anyone who takes the time to get underneath the noise of the World Wide Web will find people like you, people like Ian McGilchrist, who's a neurologist, philosopher, literary scholar, and philosopher. They will find fabulous books like The Tao of Physics, which helped influence my book. They'll find all kinds of wisdom traditions. And you'll find people like us right now, as you and I are speaking, trading visions, ideas on how we can connect as human beings in a deeper, more empathic and interconnected way. And we now have the most collaborative medium by far at our fingertips, okay? It's both an advantage and a disadvantage. If we get caught up in the noise of the digital screen, we will get debilitated and it's called cognitive dissonance. I know you know about that from your medical and therapeutic background. We get caught up in cognitive dissonance and we're just going to go for easy answers. If we can practice and play underneath the noise of the 24/7 news cycle and the anxieties around the world and get to the wisdom that's underneath there, and it's there. Wikipedia, I describe how amazing that process is. Unanimous AI, a company I never heard of, who are having doctors and computers work together to increase the ability to look at difficult radiology, x-rays. There are things going on that speak to a new renaissance, but we have to get underneath the noise of our individual brains and the collective brains. Marshall McLuhan, the great media philosopher of the 60s and 70s, taught us that every new medium is an extension of the human body, and the computer is an extension of the human brain. And so if we're going to succeed, Bernie, we have to get more in touch with the depth of our human mind. Then we can collaborate with the incredible advantages of the computer mind. But our educational system and our political system and our economic system is much more mechanized, which is why people fear that computers are going to take over our lives. Not if we access the kind of things that you and I are interested in, your listeners, the hemisphere, the Akashic record, the perennial philosophy, empathy, connectedness, do unto others as you don't do unto others as you would not want them to have to do unto you. The golden rule is one of the greatest spiritual algorithms of all time. We have enough knowledge. We need more wisdom. And that's one of the keys to my formula. Computers are better than we are right now at retrieving and analyzing information. We have enough information. We are past the information age. We're now, what I say, is in the age of recognition. AI is forcing us to look into our, I'd say, our souls and say, what does it truly mean to be human? Because before computers came around, we thought being human was getting more information. Now it's about accessing more wisdom and how we can connect with each other in more empathic and loving ways.
Right.
And have a good time doing it, by the way.
Come on, Doug. Yeah, let's have a little good time here. You're getting so serious. I mean,
I apologize.
It's all right. All right, we're talking at the beginning about having a few laughs here, and you're pounding on, of course, a key idea a lot of people are saying, but you're saying it in a clearer way than I usually hear. The chatter of our personal minds reflect the chatter of what's going on the internet. That's important, and we need to get underneath it. But you know what's funny about to me about what how you're doing it with you gotta go, you're doing that. I didn't like school. I didn't like having to learn stuff. Man, have you learned a lot of stuff. I mean, this book reflects a guy who's read a lot of stuff, because you do a lot of quoting of a lot of people. So how come you're such a walking paradox about learning? And I have a kind of answer to that, but and you don't have to be very long about that, but
right.
it's true. You have read a lot.
Okay, so I would like to I answer that question and go back to the one great thing I was taught in grade school. But when I got to college, now all of a sudden, instead of having to take required courses and feed back to the teacher what was expected in order to get a good grade, now I could choose what courses I took. And at Columbia, they had this student guide to teachers. Okay, so I could read about how every teacher taught, and so my mind was opened up by a philosophy professor, and I didn't know anything about philosophy. I took his class not because I thought I'd be interested in philosophy. I ended up majoring in philosophy, but because he sounded like the coolest guy on campus. Okay, and he's the one who opened my mind. And I'll give a synchronicity, okay, a playful synchronicity. Once my mind was open in college, I loved going to the Columbia bookstores and just let my eyes roam through those thousands of books, right? And I would just intuitively pick out one and read the first page, right? And the two books, when I first started doing this, that really got to me were both very thin books, and they couldn't have been from more different ages. One was the Tao Ching, right? And the other was The Medium is the Massage by Marshall McLuhan. But the same thing happened.
Wait a minute. The medium is the massage, is what you just said.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because here's a little known fact, a little fun thing, because McLuhan was a trickster. He loved to play. His famous phrase is the medium is the message.
Yeah,
right?
that's why I'm bringing it up.
That was supposed to be the title of his book. But check this out. The actual title is The Medium is the Massage. Why? It was a misprint by the printer. But when it came back to McLuhan, he thought it was a terrific pun. And so he said, keep it. Because his whole point of the medium is the message is that when we are on the TV screen, the digital screen, or reading a book, the medium that we're learning from is massaging our brain in very interesting ways. And that's why I spend a lot of time on McLuhan in my book, because he was not only a serious, brilliant thinker, he was the most sought after thinker of the 1960s, but he was very playful and loved to joke around. Okay, so he combined those two things very well. But what happened to me when I read the first page of McLuhan's book and the first page of that ancient seed of wisdom, the Tao Te Ching, is after reading one page, my intuition was these are two of the most important books that I could ever read, and I didn't understand one damn thing about it. In other words, my brain was both attracted to it and confused by it. And you see, the right hemisphere of our brain loves that combination because it realizes now I'm going to learn something really deep, as opposed to the way we normally pick out a book, which is, oh, this is something I think I can understand.
That's
Okay?
that's a really, really good point there, Doug, that I hope other people pay attention to, because the same thing happened to me when I was in college. I randomly, quote, found a book and I couldn't understand it. And I kept going back to that book, and that book had cascading impacts on me, both for my residency, from being in medical school. That book about expectation and experience by George Kelly, called A Theory of Personality, just talked about how expectation influences experience. And that I had to figure out what that meant because I hadn't been taught that, and Freud wasn't actually talking about the future. We're talking about the future now. So let's you and I talk about the future. And if you can, please keep looking at the camera because you kind of dunk down when you get
Oh, sorry.
excited.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
my thinking process. I'll sorry about that. Yeah.
That's the way the radio guy does it too, because
Yeah.
you don't have to be seen. And I think it's good for them to see you talking, but you get anyway, you get caught up with it. What we want to do is see if we can have a few more laughs. But let's talk about getting underneath the chatter of a 24-hour news cycle and a lot of other things. Get underneath that. Sometimes TikTok really comes up with some good stuff. That's what I look for. There's stuff that won't come up in the news cycle, so I can get underneath some of the stuff on a few of the TikTok things. But meditation is a way of various ways of one of many ways of getting underneath. But okay, let's say we get underneath. And that's a big process right now. I'd add there's a lot of problems interpersonally, which you did not mention. You kind of refer to it, but as a huge problem with people getting along with each other, trying to have a web where we can deal with each other well. There's a big problem with spiritual groups and a lot of fighting for power in spiritual groups. But let's leave that alone for a minute. I'm just doing an editorial comment there. I would like to hear how you are thinking about how the human mind and heart, the right and left hemisphere, can integrate in a positive way with artificial intelligence and with the mind of Gaia, with the mind of nature. That's what I want to get to with us.
Okay. So I'll answer that as quickly as I can with a thought experiment I put in my book, and then talking briefly about an incredible visionary who gave us a guideline to your question. So we talk about play and fun. If the thought experiment I had is if we wanted to, let's say you and I and all of your listeners and viewers decided as a group, we want to learn more about Saturn's rings. And as a group, we've never been to a library before. That's part of the thought experiment, okay? So we go to a library and we say to the librarian, how do we learn? We want to find a book about Saturn's rings. Well, the librarian would have a very specific answer because the library is set up by a brilliant, organized system called the Dewey Decimal System, which reflects the left hemisphere of the human brain, which is about organizing things sequentially and hierarchically. And she would say to us, or he would say, go to the science section. Under the science section, go to the astronomy section. Under the astronomy section, look for Saturn, and then you'll find books on Saturn and Saturn's rings. Now, to continue the thought experiment, let's say you and I and all of your listeners and viewers decided, wouldn't it be interesting to find out if there's ever been an advertising campaign based on the Buddha's insights? So now our whole group, you, me, and all of your listeners and viewers, we go back to the librarian and we say, excuse me, that you really got us to Saturn's rings rather quickly. Now, how do you get us to whether there have been any advertising campaigns based on the Buddhist teachings? What would the librarian say? Well, first of all, he or she would probably hope we never showed up, but the best they could offer is, well, go to the religion section and go under Buddhism, even though Buddhism isn't actually a religion. And then you're going to have to go through each Buddhist book's index and see if they mention advertising. And the odds are we wouldn't find one and we'd be stuck. So as I thought up this thought experiment, Bernie, I went onto my search engine and I typed in advertising campaigns based on the Buddha. In 5 seconds, I was brought to a website called The Thirsty Buddha, which is a drink made with coconut water, not sugar, which uses Buddhist insights to sell the product. 5 seconds. Hello. I was playing around, but I got an answer, an empirical answer to an interesting question. That's play at its deepest and highest level. And that's what we need more of in our personal. We don't have to wait for our educational system to catch up. We can do that right now. And since we want to have a good laugh, as long as I found that, I then typed in to my search engine, the 5 best Buddhist jokes, right? And up comes a very well-known joke about
Before you get to the joke, move your microphone closer to your mouth again.
Okay.
You knocked it.
Sorry, I get excited.
I know.
This is the trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, you get excited. Okay,
get
so we
excited.
want to hear the joke, so get it a
Okay.
little louder. Go ahead.
So the well-known joke is the Buddhist monk goes to the hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." Okay.
Make me
common
one.
joke.
I want to slow this one down because you're still doing New York speedy here. So make me one with everything. Already, we've got the for those of us who are familiar with some of this, it begins to resonate with something. So he goes to the hot dog vendor and he says, "Make me one with everything." Okay, then what?
Now, I'd heard that joke before, but I never heard the follow-up, which was on the website, which took another 5 seconds to get to, which is the same Buddhist monk goes into a pizza store shop and orders a slice of pizza. He goes to the cashier and gives a $10 bill. And he's waiting for his change, and the cashier's not offering any. So the Buddhist monk says, "Where's my change?" And the cashier says, "Change comes from within." Okay, so
Get your microphone got moved again. So
here we go. All right.
All right.
So now, not to get too much more serious, but to go to how do we integrate the formula that I put up there. And the formula has NI, which stands for nature's intelligence, in a large font, and then a parentheses, and then in a smaller font, HI, human intelligence, over AI, computer intelligence, close parenthesis, equals the new Renaissance. And it's very important that we make nature's intelligence the largest factor of those 3 forms of intelligence, because you and I agree, we were born out of nature's intelligence. Computer intelligence was born out of our brain, the human brain. And I feel strongly, as you do, that nature's intelligence is calling on us to integrate our intelligence with computer's intelligence to understand better nature's intelligence. Okay. The person who really is a guide here is not very well known. Her name is Lynn Margulis, and she earned the nickname the Angry Earth Mother. And she loved that. And long story short, I go into the whole story in my book. She was a fighter because she was getting her PhD in the 1960s when there were very few women PhDs in biology. And she stated, I love men, but I'm not going to take any crap from them. Okay. And she got a lot of crap from the kind of patriarchal men's club of biologists at that time. Not only that, her theory, which she was determined to prove, was very controversial. And that is that microbes learned through a process called self-organization, nature's intelligence, that cooperation is more powerful than competition. Okay. Now that would be a great lesson for us humans to learn, right? That cooperation is a more powerful tool than competition. She proved empirically that over millions of years, microbes, those microscopic bacteria and viruses, figured out that, yes, on the surface, they were eating each other, they were fighting each other, they were competing for territory. But underneath that, they were learning that when they cooperated, both entities advanced. And she proved this empirically, that at the core of nature's intelligence, therefore at the core of human intelligence, if we can get underneath the noise of anxiety, fear, and competition, human beings do their best when we cooperate. And you and I are talking over the most collaborative medium ever created. So if we can learn, and there's an if there, I'm optimistic, if we can learn to cooperate, and it doesn't take a majority. I end my book with a great quote by another great woman visionary, Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, who said something, I can't think of anything more important. She said, never think that a small group of committed citizens can't change the world. In fact, that's the only thing that ever has. So the conversation you and I are having right now, and the feedback you get from your listeners and your viewers, has the potential to self-organize itself into other podcasters who are doing things like what we're doing, radio shows like I'm doing. And if we do it right, synchronistically, we will start to connect with each other and collaborate and create this new Renaissance. But it always happens, and I point to the Italian Renaissance, through and after a period of darkness. With the Italian Renaissance, it was the Black Plague. In our time, it's going to be through the darkness and catastrophes of we're already seeing with global warming. And we're already seeing with the political, economic, and social disruptions taking across the world. Our task, Bernie, is to get underneath all that competition and anxiety and access our ability to cooperate, empathize, and connect with each other. Because as you've stated in your books, nature itself is a totally interconnected web. It's not a collection of isolated objects, which is how we were taught nature works. And nature, we're separate from nature, and we're to take from her what we need for our own personal comforts. How's that working out?
It's working out for increasingly no future. And I think you say that we're talking about capitalism, or not you, or others are saying that capitalism is a bet that there is no future, that we got to take all we can get right now because it's going to be over. That's a capitalistic perspective. It's not working, and capitalism is more for me than for anybody else, and you win by outcompeting other people for resources. So we can't do that. And what you're being able to talk about with some of the wonderful people that you're quoting is the importance of nature's intelligence. But what I'd like to hear during our last part of this from you is nature's intelligence and AI. You've made it clear that the idea that everything we invent is an extension of our bodies, and in this case, AI, of our minds. And I've studied how the mind of AI works to some degree, and it's a lot like ours, which is a surprise to people, but shouldn't be, because we're the ones who created it. How do we manage this major disruption in the way things have been with artificial intelligence and include nature with humanity in this as your major thesis? How does that all go together?
The book that I wrote is, and I know I like, it's a right hemisphere thing, jumping around as you do. It's fun. But there is a structure to the book. It's based on 3 shifts in consciousness that I am proposing are necessary and can point us towards the new Renaissance. And the first shift in consciousness is from the left to the right hemisphere of the brain. So I'll very quickly describe that, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Most of what I learned about this is from Ian McGilchrist, who is a contemporary philosopher, neurologist, psychiatrist, and I know you were trained psychiatrically, who wrote a brilliant book called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And what he points out with clear footnotes and empirical evidence, the left hemisphere of our brain sees the world as a series of objects to be manipulated. That was crucial to our ancient ancestors, our caveman ancestors surviving. The right hemisphere of our brain is larger and more intricately connected. It's the part of our brain that is empathic, that sees the big picture, that wants to create new ways of collaborating and coming together, which to me is, and you and I agree, is at the heart of nature's intelligence. Now, AI is already better at we humans at left hemisphere knowledge, because it can access information and analyze it significantly better than we can. So what are we needed for? We're needed for the right hemisphere, because computers are not empathic. They're not intuitive. They can imitate empathy. They can imitate intuition, but they can't perform it because their brains are mechanized. And in my opinion, and others, thank goodness we're not alone, Bernie, in what we like and like to play with in terms of ideas and sensibilities and emotions, okay, is that nature is not mechanized. Nature is more aligned with the intuitive, visionary part of our brain. So my thesis is that AI is a mirror given to us by nature's intelligence, forcing us to look into that mirror and say, in the 21st century, when computers are already better than us at accessing and analyzing information, what is the human role? And I'm proposing it's empathy, big picture thinking, thought experiments like Einstein did, creative visualization, meditation. Computers can't do this. And they're going to get smarter and smarter, but only in a left hemisphere way. So we're being called upon, I'm proposing, to shift to the right hemisphere of our brain, which all of us can do. There are many books out this. We all do it naturally. When we get anxious, is instead of simply knee-jerk going to a simple answer, to sit with a complex question, like a Zen master asking a koan, right? What is the sound of one hand clapping? No simple answer. In fact, there's no rational answer, but it encourages us to enlarge our vision of who we are as individual humans and how do we connect at a deeper level with humanity and nature out there. And there are visionaries who've been doing this for thousands of years, the Tao Ching, the Buddha, the great Hindu visionaries, the Gnostic thinkers, the Kabbalists. But we also have visionaries I put forth in my book, and people I know you have contact with who are doing this work. We have to find them. They're available underneath the noise and the anxiety.
You know, we've been talking for quite a while now, and we're getting near the end of this. And I kind of wish I had gotten to what you had just said earlier on. And I'll try to emphasize this. You kind of described it a little bit, but the clear, simple statement that AI is forcing us to become more right hemispherically oriented is a beautiful condensation of everything that you've tried to write in this book and about how AI and humanity can go together because the right hemisphere connects more with the analogicalness of nature. It's not a digital out there. And I just hadn't gotten that, Doug. I didn't get that from your book. At least I didn't get that. But that, if there's any really beautiful message I get, and I'll try to convey that in my summary, is just what I just said. The left hemisphere, hey, I can't beat this guy, so I better go over to the other side and let my AI take care of the left side part stuff, and that'll do that, and I'll do stuff with it. But I have to develop my ability to play, to imagine, because that's what AI can't do. It can't imagine. It can't imagine to some degree, just based on old stuff, but can't imagine new stuff, like Wikipedia, for example. And that way of I becoming more intuitive with my right hemisphere, I connect more with the natural world. And that puts us all three together in a happy little dance around the circle thing.
Yeah, and you know, when one of the things I learned in writing this book is a distinction I never thought about before between complicated and complex. When something's complicated, the best way to solve it is to break it down into simpler parts and put it back together, understand how things are put together. Like a computer. We can take it, I can't, but my media guy can take a computer apart, understand how the parts fit together. Okay. But we're being called upon to think in the way the right hemisphere was wired to do it. Why did nature, and by the way, every living organism has a left and right hemisphere of the brain. But in the human, our right hemisphere is much larger than the left and much more intricately wired. Why did nature do that? Why did evolution, which to me is the ultimate game we're playing, is evolution, right? That's nature's game. That's the game we're playing, whether we know it or not. And games are both serious, but they need to be played. And they require a playful and imaginative mindset. And I'm the first to agree, it's difficult to be playful and imaginative when we're anxious and the anxiety levels around the world are ramping up. That's our task. Nature is asking of us, are we capable of going to the playful, imaginative, intuitive, empathic, loving part of our brain, which we now know is connected directly to the heart? Okay. Descartes said, heart, body, brain, totally separated. And that's how our educational system's set up. Knowledge is clearly distinct. No, it isn't. Our brains are directly connected to our hearts. These things are much better understood by the right hemisphere of our brain. And this is where we need to shift. And it's happening. And I think the World Wide Web makes it more capable of happening. And it doesn't take a majority of people for us to do this, Bernie. It takes a small, committed group of citizens. And, I was really thrilled. I've always known that collaboration in my life was more important than competition. And I was a high-ranked tennis player, okay? But it's been proven scientifically that nature is called throughout evolution here on the planet Earth. It was Lynn Margulis who proved this, who is the co-author of the Gaia theory with James Lovelock. That's a synchronicity, okay? That nature cannot be understood by breaking it down into simpler parts.
And
It
that's
has to
what
be
you mean.
understood.
That's what you mean by complex
Correct.
versus complicated.
Complicated.
Just that you just made it more complicated right now, because that's what we need to have understanding of complexity, which you
Right.
can't break down. And from complexity and chaos emerges new forms, and that's the self-organizing idea you're talking about before. That there's a lot of things you're saying. There's a lot of things that the tennis player wants to do some serve it out. You got a good
Right.
serve. You know how to do that backhand down the line. You got a lot of moves, and they come out in the way you talk. There's a lot of stuff you can do. There's a lot of intricacies in what you say, what you're saying, and what you write. But Doug, there's the two things are the connect our right brain to nature more, and let AI take care of what the left brain was doing, so that we can manage that connection to nature, and that will lead to cooperation and empathy and love, and connect us with our hearts better. That's the message I get from Doug Gunther.
Well, you see, all right. What's so great about this is I learned about my book by talking to you. Okay. The fact that I wrote the book doesn't mean that I understand all of
I
it.
know that one. Yeah.
Okay. So you've helped me, as well as your listeners and viewers, understand my own book in certain ways that I maybe hadn't seen it in a certain emphasis before. And that gets to me to the heart of the word conversation, which was the name of my first talk show. The word conversation, which we've been having, has a very interesting etymology, Bernie. It comes from the two Latin words that mean to move with. Okay. A debate, which is where most of what we see in the media is, and I love debates, right? But a debate is not a learning experience. A debate is a competition. It's a sporting event.
Yeah.
We listen to a debate because we're rooting for one side to win, and that's fine. But more important than a debate is a conversation.
Moving together.
And so when you say to me, number one, you keep bumping your microphone away and ducking your head. Well, I'm a radio guy and I get excited and I have to learn more about the visual medium. Okay. So I learned that from you. And I also learned that some of my answers could have been shorter and a little more direct. So I wrote the book, but I'm learning about even the stuff in my book from talking to you. That's a conversation, because I wasn't here to tell you what my book was about. I was excited about getting on this program and moving with you in a conversation. And that was the most exciting part.
So we have, and let's move into the other key thing you have said, and then we're going to end. 11% or some small percentage relative of the population can make a change. And I am looking for such connections to be part of, where I have a contribution to make. We're all cells in the collective human organism. We're all parts of the collective human mind. We each have things we can contribute to making that collective human mind more connected to nature, more connected with each other, integrating AI into that collective human mind so that we can progress into the renaissance that you think and I hope we can get to. So tell me about how these organizations, how this connectedness, this small group of people can take place, because I'm very much wanting to be part of something greater instead of just doing my thing.
I'll give a specific example from history, and then we can talk about contemporary times. Another thing I learned from writing my book. We were taught that the American Revolution was primarily the intelligence and bravery of our founding fathers. Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Paul Revere in his ride, etc. They were incredibly great leaders in a very difficult time. They deserve all the credit in the world. They did not create the American Revolution. We now know historically, we were never taught, I was never taught this in school. You can tell me if you were. The seeds of the American Revolution grew through thousands of chaotic, unorganized conversations, debates, shouting matches that took place in taverns and coffee houses in Boston over a period of 10 years. They weren't Americans then. They were British they were colonists. The colonists were angry about taxation without representation, et cetera, and they were having arguments and discussions about a better way to do things and what can we do about this. And the most sophisticated form of media was the printing press, and they would print one-page screeds, newsletters, and post them on lampposts saying, you know, this is what we should be doing. But a lot of the conversations and arguments that seeded the American Revolution were fueled by alcohol and caffeine. They took place not in quiet libraries, they took place in taverns and coffee houses. And you can read historians, I quote some of them in my book, this is how the American Revolution, now none of them knew that they were creating a revolution. They were intuitively, exasperatingly, and creatively talking about things that were of concern to them. This is a process in nature called self-organization, and it ended up in a revolution. So what we're doing right now is what thousands of podcasters, TikTok video producers, YouTubers are doing. And yeah, most of it is buy my product, or here's the right way to do something. But people are doing amazingly imaginative, cooperative, collaborative things. You can find them on YouTube, TikTok, podcasts like yours, radio shows like mine. We are self-organizing. I'll be more specific now. I have every intention. I have an idea percolating in my right hemisphere of my brain on a project. I am going to contact you about it because I'd love you to be part of it. I would love to be part of any project you're doing. We're making connections. It's happening under the 24/7 news cycle. None of us can predict exactly that. Self-organization is not easily predictable. It takes a while for it to become clear and visually apparent. But when it does, we all sit there and go, how'd that happen? Where'd that come from? The same way when we get an intuitive synchronistic experience. How did that happen? Right? I read your book, that amazing synchronicity about your father's death. I had one with my father's death. These things connect us in ways that are so deep. And the fact that we could have this conversation gives me even more confidence that we can continue this kind of self-organizing process that will eventually lead to a new renaissance.
Oh, Maine. That's
Did you just say, now you got me hungry. I thought you said lo mein. Now I'm hungry.
no, I did say oh Maine. Amen if you want. There's now you're talking. This is this is really cool what you were just talking about, and I think we'll end there. It's just how to get this self-organizing organized. And the only way you can do that is by making connections and having conversations where we learn from each other and move ahead. So I'd add to your way we learn, trial and error, play game stories, conversation. I would add to your list of how we learn things.
I accept that. But for me, a true conversation is playful, collaborative,
has stories in it,
and has stories in it, and look, and trial and error. I made some errors during our conversation that I'm glad you pointed out. I pushed my mic, I ducked my head. I thought our conversation included all three of those forms of learning: trial and error, games and play, and stories.
That's true. I'm glad you say that. I'm glad you point that out, because I was kind of wondering about that, and maybe maybe I can buy something from you, and I'm going to say, "Where's my change?"
which we
And
know comes from within.
that's, we know, comes from within. So we're gonna change right now into like ending this formal part of the conversation. So thank you very much, Douglas Grunther, in that wonderful part of the world called Woodstock, New York.
And thank you, Bernie. It was a pleasure being on your program.
Thank you.